AI is scaling fast. Companies like Microsoft are spending billions to expand it. New models, new data centers, massive infrastructure. But here's the problem: even with all that money, most companies still can't scale AI. Not because they don't understand it, not because they lack talent, but because they can't access what scaling actually requires. And this is where the system breaks. Because AI is no longer limited by technology. It's limited by something else. When people think about AI, they think about software. They think about models. They think about intelligence improving over time, but that's not where the real constraint is. This is not just a software system, it's an infrastructure system. And infrastructure behaves differently. And infrastructure behaves differently. You can improve models quickly. You can deploy code instantly. But infrastructure takes time, it takes capital, it takes scale. And that creates a completely different dynamic. Because now scaling AI is not just about building better models. It's about sustaining the system behind them. And most companies are not built for that. They don't have the capital. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the access. So they hit a limit. And this is the REF pyramid. This is not about AI capability. This is about who can afford to scale it. And once that becomes the constraint, everything changes. AI scaling looks like a software problem, but it isn't. It is a system that expands through multiple layers at the same time. And every time that system expands, something else has to expand with it. When a scales grows, not just cascade. What grows is demand for compute, demand for infrastructure, demand for resources. Take a company like Microsoft. When it deploys a larger AI model, it is not just improving performance. It is increasing the amount of compute required to run that model at scale. That creates a direct chain. More advanced models require more compute. More compute requires more hardware. More hardware requires more resources to operate. And this is where the system becomes non-linear. Because improvements in AI capability do not increase demand gradually. They increase it exponentially. Each new generation of models requires disproportionately more infrastructure, which means scaling is not just growth, it is acceleration. And acceleration creates pressure. Pressure on every layer of the system. That pressure eventually hits a limit, because not all parts of the system can scale at the same speed. Some layers are flexible. Software can be deployed quickly. Models can be updated frequently, but other layers are rigid. Infrastructure takes time. Physical systems require planning. Capacity cannot be created instantly. This creates a mismatch. Demand grows exponentially, but supply grows slowly. And when demand grows faster than supply, a bottleneck appears. That bottleneck is not theoretical, it is structural. It comes from limitations that cannot be bypassed quickly. Jimmy Tuka built constraints. This is the key dynamic. The system wants to scale, but the constraint prevents it from scaling freely. And once a constraint appears, the system stops being open. Because overcoming that constraint requires something else. Capital. Scaling infrastructure is not just difficult. It is expensive, not at the level of millions, at the level of billions. To expand capacity, companies must invest in large-scale systems. They must secure long-term resources. They must build or finance infrastructure. This changes the nature of the system, because now scaling is no longer just a technical problem. It becomes a financial problem. Only companies with sufficient capital can operate at this level. Only companies capable of deploying billions can expand capacity fast enough. Everyone else faces a different reality. They cannot build infrastructure. They cannot secure long-term capacity. They cannot compete at scale. This is where cost becomes control, because cost determines who can enter and who cannot. Once access depends on capital, the system becomes selective. Not everyone can participate. Only a few players can meet the requirements. Those players gain access. They secure capacity. They continue scaling. Everyone else is pushed to the margins. They depend on what remains available. They operate with constraints. They fall behind. This is not a gradual process. It is structural. The system does not exclude by choice. It excludes by design. Because when access is limited, competition is limited. And when competition is limited, power concentrates. This leads to a clear outcome. Most companies are locked out, not because they lack ideas, not because they lack talent, but because they lack access to the system at scale, and access is no longer open. It is controlled, which means the system evolves in one direction: scaling, constraint, cost, access, exclusion. And once that dynamic is in place, it reinforces itself. The players with access continue to grow. The players without access fall further behind, and the gap becomes permanent. So the system reaches a point where it can't scale freely anymore, not because the technology stopped improving, but because the system behind it can't keep up. And this is where the real bottleneck becomes visible. It's not the model. It's not the software. It's the ability to sustain the system at scale. And that ability is not evenly distributed, because sustaining the system requires something very specific: massive capital. Only a few companies can deploy billions consistently. Only they can expand infrastructure fast enough. Only they can remove the constraint. And this is where control emerges. Because once only a few players can scale, those players define the system. They control capacity. They control access. They control who gets to compete. And everyone else depends on them. So this is not just a story about AI. It's a story about power, because when scaling depends on infrastructure, and infrastructure depends on capital, power follows the same path: money, control. And once that structure is in place, the system stops being open. It becomes controlled by those who can afford to sustain it. Which means the future of AI is not decided by innovation alone. It's decided by who can finance scale. And that determines everything: who grows, who competes, and who is left out. And this is the industry code.